Welcome to the Meridians virtual celebration of the contributors to Volume 23. And I am not looking at the right thing, but I will continue. Volume 23, Issues 1 and 2. I am Janetta Candelario, the editor of Meridians and professor of sociology, Latin American and Latina studies, as well as the community engagement and social change concentration at Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts, of which I am also an alum. Smith is also the founding home of the journal Meridians. Before we turn to our program, however, I begin by noting that Smith College stands on Nunatak land. We also acknowledge our neighboring Indigenous nations, the Nipmuc and the Wampanoag to the east, the Mohegan and the Pequot to the south, the Mohican to the west, and the Abenaki to the north. As part of our commitment at Meridians to both acknowledging and addressing the ongoing effects of settler colonialism on Indigenous peoples of the world, and in addition to consideration of indigeneity in the spring 2023 issue focused on BIPOC Europe, Meridians has devoted 2 recent issues to questions of Indigenous feminisms across the world, the first of which was published in the spring of 2024 and which we are celebrating today, and the second, which is forthcoming in just 2 months in the spring of 2025. We consider these to be preliminary steps towards a fuller incorporation of Indigenous and decolonial feminist knowledge producers into the Meridians mission. I also want to take a moment to remember the tens of thousands of migrants, exiles, and refugees of political regimes and violence, as well as global climate change, who've had to suddenly leave their homelands on a wing and a prayer. May they continue to be welcomed and supported wherever they find themselves. Finally, we stand in solidarity with all those of us and out in the world who have been made targets for state-sanctioned and funded vigilantism against women's bodily autonomy, as well as human rights more generally in the United States and globally, as well as those whose lives have been destroyed by the nearly normalized proliferation of gun violence in the United States, and with all of those who continue to struggle against ethno-nationalism, fascism, fundamentalism, and patriarchal, homophobic, transphobic violence of all kinds. Before we begin our program and welcome our guests, I would like to also thank the Smith College-based staff members who do the critical behind-the-scenes work of materializing the Meridians project. Ali Einbinder, who cannot join us today, but is always a central anchor to the Meridians project. Dr. Mei Chang, who is our editorial assistant, and our 6 fabulous student interns, and especially student Renal Dahan, who is joining us today. Now, finally, we turn to what I hope will be a dynamic conversation between Meridians contributors to Volume 23, Issues 1 and 2, of whom a record number, 18, are joining us today. I believe folks will be coming in and out, time zones changes and so forth. The first issue that we published last year was, as I said, on Indigenous feminisms across the world. And we have about 7 authors and contributors more broadly from that issue with us, including, I believe, the cover artist is hoping to join us. And the second issue, published in the fall of 2024, was titled Counterpoints, of which we also have 8 or 9 contributors planning to be in attendance today. So please join me in welcoming everyone. I just want to say a word before I begin the actual program that this volume celebration practice began in the fall of 2000 during the pandemic. And it was an effort to bring together in a moment of global isolation the folks whose work graced the pages of Meridians as an effort to kind of lift our spirits and allow us to see one another, literally, to see who we are sharing the pages of these issues with. This year, by the way, just really quickly, for folks who haven't seen them, these are the 2 beautiful issues. And to celebrate, right? Because I kept imagining that it would be so lovely to have like a cocktail party or a tea party or whatever your beverage of choice is with all of these fabulous contributors. And in the absence of that, to do this. I'm now thinking that I might go back to my original plan and try to host a reception at National Women's Studies Association, which is our signature conference, and which this year is a meeting in San Juan, Puerto Rico. So keep an eye out for that. Even though it is a virtual gathering, I hope to replicate the feeling of conviviality and engaged conversations that in real life engagement would normally allow us for. So in order to ensure that everyone gets an opportunity to speak at least once, and since our event is just over an hour long, not everyone will answer every question. Instead, I ask that one or two of our guests answer any given question until everyone has had an opportunity to share their thoughts. We ask the attendees in the audience to please hold your questions and put them in the chat. Only 2 meridians where Renal will compile them and will share them with us at the end, so that we can have hopefully some time for Q&A. Okay, we've also linked in the chat for you the participants' professional biographies, along with hyperlinks to their pieces in the issues, excuse me. So we begin by asking the participants to please introduce yourselves by your full name, where in the world you are joining us from, and the title or nature of your contribution to Volume 23. Beginning with, on my left here, Professor Ajayi-Lowo. And then you pass it along to someone else, Umaya, please.
Okay, popcorn style, got it. Hi, everyone. I'm Ajayi-Lowo. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Michigan in what is historically Anishinaabe land. And name, location, what else am I missing? I was startled by going first.
Your piece in Meridians.
My piece in Meridians is in Volume 2, and it's coming out for community, coming out for the cause, and it's about queer Arab American activism and Palestine solidarity politics in the 1990s. And I will popcorn to Aisha. Oh, you're muted.
Hi, yeah, sorry, I was still muted. My name is Aisha Abdinazam. I'm an assistant professor of sociology at Susquehanna University, which is in central Pennsylvania. My piece, Enhancing Human Dignity Here and Around the World, Black sororities as an international uplift movement, was what I contributed. Did I answer all the questions?
Yes, also in this one. All right, and you have to pass it along, Aisha.
Oh, I would like to send it to Esther.
Warm greetings, everyone. I'm Esther Oluwashino Ajayi-Lowo. I'm an assistant professor of Women's and Gender Studies at Texas Christian University, Fort Worth in Texas. And my paper is in Volume 1, and it's called Save Motherhood Initiative with the African Indigenous Birthing Knowledge, where I highlight the significance, epistemological and practical significance of African Indigenous birthing knowledge and practices, using Nigeria as a case study, and just very excited to be here with you all to share today. Thank you. And I'm going to popcorn it to Denise.
Denise, yeah.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good evening from Germany. It's 10 p.m. right now. And I'm Denise Schallenkammer, and right now I'm a PhD student at the Institute of Media Research at the University of Rostock. And until recently, I was a research associate at the Sorbian Institute, which is an institution who deals with the history, culture, and language of the Sorbs, who are one of 4 officially recognized ethnic minorities within Germany. And my piece is in the first volume. It's the grandmother of Indigenous filmmaking in New Zealand, Merata Mita. Film is her Patu. And it's about the importance of Indigenous filmmaking by providing an insight into the life and work of New Zealand's first female Maori filmmaker who made a feature-length narrative. Yeah, that's for me. And I pass it to Aldana.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Aurora Santiago Ortiz, she, her, ella. I am in Puerto Rico right now, but I am assistant professor of gender and women's studies and Chicana and Latina studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. My article is in the second volume, and it is in the second issue, sorry, it's called Colectiva Feminista en Construcción, Building a Transnational Feminist Pedagogy. It's about a Black feminist organization in Puerto Rico that has emerged in the last decade and is radically transforming the protest landscape through their tactics and repertoires of agitation, confrontation, and education. So I will pass it to Lupe.
All right. So good afternoon, everyone. I am Lupe Escobar, and I have a joint appointment in the Department of English and the Department of Gender, Race, and Identity. And I'm coming to you from Reno, Nevada. And my piece is on a Salvadoran American author, Claribel Alegria. I look at two literary texts, and I draw from Marxist feminisms as well as memory studies. I will pass it on to Caroline.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Caroline Marr. I am in Oakland on Ohlone land, and I'm a poet, and I'm not in academia. And I have two poems in the second issue from volume 23. And also I am a Smith College alum, so I graduated from there in undergrad in 2005.
Oh, Caroline, see, you didn't reveal that. Now we know. Now we got to include you in the alumni authors thing. Way to bury the headline. Okay.
And I will pass it to Chashu.
Hi. Actually, I saw some people raising questions in Q&A box, and they said that they cannot enter the room. Did you see it?
So I think Renal will help them.
Yeah, I see it. I'm working on it. The Zoom webinar is not very forgiving, but I'm doing my best.
Well, okay. So yeah, my name is Chashu Chan, and you can also call me Jessica. It's my middle name, and also it's a name that many friends and family call me. I am a PhD student at Binghamton University in comparative literature, and my work is inspired by Chinese, Taiwanese, and Hong Kong films, literature, games, and media and philosophical thought. And also I work a lot on the cultures and the epistemic resistance provided by transnational women of color and queers of color. Yeah, and I'm currently finishing my dissertation in Dayton, Ohio. Yeah.
Thank you, Chashu. Who you pass?
I'll pass it to Priti. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Priti Narayan. I am assistant professor in the Department of Geography. I'm at the University of British Columbia, which is located on the traditional ancestral unceded territory of the Musqueam people in what is known as Vancouver, Canada. In volume 1, as part of the work towards volume 1, I had the pleasure of interviewing Ruby Hembrom, who is an Adivasi publisher and author. And I'm sad that Ruby couldn't join us today, but I am happy to be here. I would like to pass it on to Yael. Have you had a chance? Am I pronouncing your name right?
Thank you. So my name is Yael Valencia Aldana, and my work is in volume 1. It is the poem Open Your Mouth, and it is about a modern woman's connection to ancestors. Currently, I'm in South Florida on Mississippi land, and I'm very excited to be here and participate. So I am going to popcorn it to Shira.
I'm sorry, I think maybe to Lisa. Let's popcorn it to Lisa. I'm glad you made it.
Oh.
Lisa.
Okay.
Thank you for helping me get in, and I'm so grateful to be here. My name is Lisa Wright, and I am currently a lecturer at Johns Hopkins University in the University Writing Program. My essay is in the Counterpoints, which I think came out in the fall of 2024. It's called According to the Record, and this is an essay that is beloved to me because it documents the lineage of my grandmother and my great-grandmother giving birth first without a midwife, a Black midwife, but then my grandmother giving birth in a Jim Crow hospital. So I'll stop there though. And also I apologize. I'm not sure who has spoken because I just popped in. So if anyone is left, please speak up.
I'll pass it along on your behalf. We said to Yurika. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hello, did I hear my name?
Yes.
Sorry to come in late. Half an hour past trying to get in here. I'm so sorry. Hi, my name is Yurika Tamura, and I'm an assistant professor at Asian and Middle Eastern Studies at UNC Chapel Hill, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I had my article in #1 of volume 23, and I'm a descendant of Ainu people of Japan. So I wrote about women's performance and how they use the rhetoric of human, which is what Ainu means. So, and that their performance in this edition. So nice to meet you, and thank you for letting me in finally.
Thank you for making it and hanging in there. So because you guys didn't know who was in and wasn't, I'm going to pass it along to Shreya Tariq.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shreya. I'm currently based in Paris. And so the article that, what do I do? I'm a lecturer here at Sciences Po in Paris. And my article is about, I think it's in the second volume. It's titled Within and Outside the Black Maghrebi Binary. It's a conversation with Maha Abdel Hamid, who is a Black Tunisian scholar, and it basically talks about the construction of Blackness and Maghrebiness as like two different things. I mean, Maghrebi being the North African identity, which shows like how these two identities are constructed as separate dichotomous, not only in North African context, but also in the European context, and how that is also sort of how that essentialization is reused also by feminist spaces that are trying to combat Islamophobia as well as anti-Blackness, but they sort of retake that. So that's my contribution. Thank you for this conversation.
Thank you for joining us from across the pond. Shamara, not last, but certainly not least, I think, unless we're getting someone else in. And I think might be working on opening more doors in the virtual world over there for us. So
yeah, no, sorry about the tech mix-up. But yeah, I go by Shamara or Sham. And my piece is in the Counterpoints issue titled Beyond Black Girlhood, an Underground Railroad to Nowhere, where I'm basically talking about sort of new speculative constructions of Black girlhood in speculative fiction by N.K. Jemisin, Octavia Butler, Colson Whitehead, and so forth. And really how, like, you know, how can we kind of trouble the idea of girlhood since, right, Black girls are so adultified that like the idea of coming of age doesn't really fit. So yeah, that's kind of where my work is coming into conversation. Thank y'all for this.
thank you all for joining us. Renelle, have we managed to let everyone in who is our participants?
There is one more person who is hopefully joining soon, and then I can promote them to panelist. I'm sorry about that.
No, I really appreciate your managing technology, which I cannot do. So, so if our final panelist arrives, I will pause and we will give them the microphone to introduce themselves, okay? All right, so as I mentioned at the beginning, I basically ask a question and then I ask one or two folks to respond to that question as the spirit or the universe moves you. There are, I think, 6 questions that I have prepared in advance, which I hope will also give us a little bit of time in the end for you to ask questions of each other or to address any questions that the audience might have. We have, I think, about 30 folks in attendance, which is a really good turnout for a Wednesday afternoon. So my first question is, this year Meridians marks its 25th anniversary, which we are preparing to celebrate in October of 2025 here at Smith College. And as I reflect on that history and my own relationship to the journal, which began in 1999-2000 as an author, and then subsequently as a reviewer, and now for the last 8 years as an editor, I am curious to learn about your experience of and with Meridians. In other words, why Meridians as a home for your work? Jump in, Amaya.
I'll go. Okay. So first of all, I'm also a Smith alum, Caroline, also 05, but did we know each other? I don't know. So that's beside the point. But for me, Meridians, I confession, I really wanted to be a Meridians intern when I was at Smith, but I was really scared and unafraid because I'm Palestinian American. I was like, there wasn't really a conversation about Arab racial formation at the time between like 2000 and 2005. Like that was just when the work was starting to emerge. And so I felt like I wasn't necessarily allowed. Like transnationalism wasn't even a word that I could comprehend at the time. And I was an American studies major. Um, but I always kind of sensed that Meridians was this place where intellectually I was very curious and wanted to kind of figure out and be a part of. But at the time when I was a student, I didn't have the language or the wherewithal to figure out my relationship to Meridians and to the topics of race and transnationalism. And it took a long time coming to get there, to go to graduate school in ethnic studies and kind of figure it all out. But in the piece that I submitted is actually it was a back burner piece to my book project. It was a kind of passion piece about queer Arab American activism pre 9/11, because there's a very ripe discourse about anti-pinkwashing activism and Palestine solidarity, queer Palestine solidarity politics and activism in the post 9/11 era. But I just felt constantly irked by that discourse because I personally knew of queer Arabs who had been doing activism before 9/11, but there was just no scholarship on it. And so I also was encountering students because in my own teaching, which I teach in Arab American studies, I kept kind of wanting to introduce this history to my students, but I felt at a loss. And I was like, well, I guess I just have to write some of it. So in that sense, this kind of like bridging of these questions about Arab racial formation, American imperialism and its politics, transnationalism, all seemed to kind of make sense for Meridians. And it just sort of, unfortunately, it came out at a time when it was just like so prescient and so important for these questions about Palestine solidarity politics to be, happening in pop culture at the time. So for me, it's just like very special and important for me to be in that issue and to finally just kind of realize that I can be part of the conversation and that the history of queer Arab Americans can be part of the conversation instead of constantly kind of being denied or silenced or hidden under the rug. And yeah, so that's kind of those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Amaya. It's lovely.
All right. I'd like to go.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. So my response is also similar to Umaya, and to really think about how transnationalism was the main catch for me, because my work is on Burton epistemologies and also thinking about my research, which is focusing on how do we improve maternal health for Nigerians and how do we reduce maternal mortality rate, but also just like being situated in the US and seeing that it's the same issue that we're all facing. And in my research, which started with my dissertation, also finding that wherever we find Black and brown Burton people, maternal mortality rate is just high across geographical borders. And so I know that I have to think about this research as a transnational research in itself. So even though I'm like locating my research on Nigerian Burton people, I also have to make that transnational connection to know that this is really transnational, and to think about race in itself as something that functions not only in the US where you have racial minorities and then dominant race of white race, but also on the continent to see our racial disparity and global disparities around maternal health issues is something that's definitely transnational. But also to think about that particular issue, which also expanded indigeneity, feminist indigenous approach beyond just indigeneity in the US, also indigenous or Native Americans, but think about indigeneity as something that's also transnational. And this also connects to my research, which I've been using indigenous framework for, even though it's Nigerian. So this also was a good way to think about that. This is where my paper needs to be, because it's using this indigenous approach and to say that, you know, we think about settler colonialism in the US for Native peoples, in Canada for Native peoples, but also we can also think about epistemological colonialism, which is continuum, which is, you know, what some scholars would call coloniality, is also applicable to the continent of Africa. So I thought that it would be a good place to really bring out this research, to think about it in terms of race, in terms of transnationalism, but also using that transnational indigenous approach for my research. So it was so apt for my paper at the time, and I'm excited and really grateful that my paper was actually published in that volume.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Esther. That was really, yeah, it's really helpful. And it's also wonderful to think about, again, the geographies, right, that we are moving across. I think we could probably have one more person answer this question if someone feels inspired to do so. Yeah, Shamara.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just wanted to say that, you know, like I said, my work is about troubling categories, and I think that's a thing that Meridians does so well, right? I've always been really inspired and learned so much about how Black feminist frameworks can continue to trouble categories. And it's something that also feels even personal to me as like a non-binary person who has found themselves between categories, right? And so anyway, yeah, I think that's why it felt like a really great spot for my work to sort of think through, you know, how can we trouble the category of not just Black girl, but girlhood itself, right? How is Blackness itself a speculative project, right? And how is that project also, you know, continuing this legacy of category troubling that I think, you know, I was really inspired by the way so many of the other pieces in Counterpoints do that, right? Like even with that title, right? Counterpoints. So yeah, it felt like a great fit for that.
Thank you. Yeah, the issue, I'll just say quickly, and I'm actually going to go ahead and allow maybe like 2 more people to answer this question, because it's so nice to hear what motivated you. But the issue, the counterpoint issue specifically comes from one of the original feature genres that the founding editors came up with. And as I was reading those pieces, you know, and thinking, what is the thread that unites all of this stuff? Because that's my work as editor. I suddenly realized all of these are contesting something, right? Or stepping into a conversation that perhaps is being claimed as established, but you know, they're saying, no, not so fast, actually. Here's another way to think about this, right? Would somebody else like to answer this question about why Meridians? Yes, Shasu. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really happy to hear all the answers so far. It's really, really beautiful because this is my first article published, and as a PhD student, I'm really, really happy to find Meridians the home for my first article. And I'm from Taiwan, and with many my family members in the Trans-Pacific region, but I personally I'm from Taiwan and now living in the US. And it took me some time to realize that my becoming of a woman of color, a gender non-conforming woman of color in the US, is also the same becoming of a Taiwanese woman in the transnational sense. So I'm thinking of that. And also because my home country, Taiwan, is a place where now it's somehow a toxic pursuit of nationalism, which I think is quite problematic sometimes. And to think transnationally about many of my own experiences, and also my new experiences, and all the people around me in the US, I feel that I'm making that connection, in this becoming altogether. And so I'm trying to show that in this article. My article is titled Denaming. And so in the first part of the article, I engage with Sylvia Winter and Frans Fanon, Meryl Lugones, and later part, I return to some experiences happening in Taiwan and making that connection to see, what I can contribute from this connection. Yeah.
So thank you. Right, and it just goes to show, right, the richness of how these conversations really generate, right, across fields, across spatialities and temporalities, right, to advance our thinking. My next question is, what role, if any, do activism and protest play in your work as scholars, writers, artists, and what role can Meridians play in that work? Yael, please. Yeah, let's see if I can unmute you, maybe.
Okay, thank you. I wouldn't unmute. I think Toni Morrison had a similar quote where she talked about the artist's most important role when times are dark. And I think to maintain creativity, to keep sharing our work, our feelings, not only helps ourselves to process what's going on around us, but also helps to lift the souls of other people and to help them to fight the good fight, and creates the sense of community, because really in these difficult times, that is the biggest asset we have, community. And I think just things like this, I'm sitting here and I'm just really loving every minute of the conversation, that there's a space for people to come together and talk about real things that are deep, meaningful, impactful. I'm a poet and I have an MFA, but I also have an MA in women, gender, and sexuality. So for me, Meridians was a sweet spot. And when I saw the call, I'm like, oh, I just have to jump in there because I feel very comfortable in both areas. But every day we have to fight in some way, even just maintaining our identities, whole, and not letting the world crush who we are, so that we're conforming to whichever way the wind is blowing. And it's just so important to have forums like this and to have a forum to share our creativity, because now there's rampant fear with the type of work that we shared here, that it's not appropriate for society in some way. And of course, that's not true, but we have to harden ourselves and keep going. And I think Meridians is a big part of that, and like a beacon for many of us creators.
Thank you for that, Anne. It was really nice to hear. I appreciate it. Is someone else? Yeah, Aurora?
Yeah, I'm not great with like off the cuff, so I'll try to make this short and like coherent. But I think the role of activism and protest is the reason why I'm doing the work that I'm doing. In the article, I talk about the personal stake that I have in the organization that I document. I think the work of documenting now is more political than ever, when there are efforts to erase and destabilize knowledge production from many fronts. And so I think that the reason I decided to do a PhD later in my life, because I went to law school and I went to film school, was that I found a space where I could write about and document the work that's being done in Puerto Rico to challenge colonialism, to further liberation and self-determination. So for me, I have a very political and personal stake in that work. It's inseparable from myself. So I think it's crucial, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I believe in that work as well. And the role of Meridians, I think that it's an archive of all of the work that we see of resistance, the work of knowledge production and methodological work that I think is very important to know about, and I'm also very excited about everybody else's work, and I want to read everything, because I think that even though our geographies are very different, I think there's so many points of connection even within poetry. So yeah, I think that's my answer.
Thank you. Yeah. One more person want to speak
Yeah,
to
I
that
wanted
question
to.
of activism? Yes, Lisa.
I wanted to jump in and say, I think the role of activism is for us to show up where we feel our calling. As a lecturer at Johns Hopkins University, I'm in the university writing program, but I teach classes that center Black maternal health. And this essay is, according to the record, it is a evidence of not of the delegitimization of Black midwives here in the United States, specifically in the South, in Lynchburg, Virginia, in Appomattox, where the Civil War was like the last battle of the Civil War. And so I'm looking at how Black midwives, who always cared for Black women, right? They always cared for their bodies, were actually taken away in a time where we needed them, right? And so they're saying that you can't work anymore, you can't practice care, and we're going to move to the hospital. And so according to the record, I go back and I had spoke to my grandmother. You know, I have this is like storytelling. This is a personal history mixed with research, is what, according to the record, is. And I took my grandmother's story, and I also went to the archive and tried and read her record, her birth certificate, and her daughter's death certificate, to understand how she was treated in a time when Black midwives were moved away and Black women had to give birth in Jim Crow hospitals. And so, you know, through that, we find out that she was bound, right? She couldn't move. She was in labor for 30 hours, right? And so I think a part of activism for me is not only is that I'm publishing this, but I'm also teaching this history, because I'm able to work with public health students, pre-med students. All of my students they want to be OBGYNs. And I've had students who said, oh, that's Marion Sims? You mean he's the father of gynecology? You mean he's the woman who practiced on Anarcha, Betsy, and Lucy? And I'm a senior and I don't know this. I'm a practicing RN and I don't know this. Yes. So I see my work as an intervention into the pre-med curriculum, so that we don't keep replicating students who are going to go out and be harmful. And even though they may not want to reproduce harm, if they don't know the foundation of the very, what am I trying to say? The very discipline that they want to go into, how will they do any different? How will we intercept or even like intervene in the Black maternal health crisis? And so to say that in this time that we're living in, I had a student present yesterday on the CDC and maternal health, and he was like, I kept coming up to these links that just would not open up. And I'm like, well, welcome to your world. And what do we do about it, right? This is where we live. What do we do about it? So thank you, Meridians. What role does Meridians play? Thank you for publishing these essays. Thank you for allowing us to come together and have these conversations. You know, my work is really fuzzy because it's in between the personal story, but it's also with the research, right? And so thank you for giving me a place. I've always wanted to be in Meridians because I felt like this is where my type of work lands. And this is I'm real excited about, according to the record, because it's the first essay out of a manuscript that I'm working on. So yeah, thank you.
That's wonderful. Yeah, and that really so beautifully captures, Lisa, those intersections, right, between our teaching, our scholarship, our testimonios, as we say in Latin American studies, right, our testifying to, right, these histories. And I really appreciate the mention of archives, because that really is how I see Meridians itself, as like literally a living archive of what women of color, feminists, BIPOC feminists, transnational global feminists are doing, right? What we are doing as knowledge producers, but also what we have been doing as we tell these histories and these stories, and how important that is, especially in these times. I want to just tell you really quickly, because I forget which one of you mentioned it, about, oh, maybe it was you, Yael, about the importance of this space now as much, I wouldn't say as much, not really more than ever, because there's never been a time where it's just been safe, right, and okay. But I want to share with you the good news, in case you haven't heard it, that Meridians did secure an endowment from an anonymous alumni donor, fan of the journal, that gave $1 million, that has now grown to 1.25 million, and that we are aiming to get to 2.5 million for our 25th anniversary. And the endowment explicitly says that the journal has complete editorial freedom and academic freedom, right? So that was one of the things that I wanted to make sure the donor/donors knew. This does not give you the right to meter la cuchara, as we say in Spanish, right? To make decisions or try to force us in one direction or another. So it really has been significant in terms of being able to do what we do with integrity, right? And to know that it will continue to be done. And it is not subject to the kind of interventions that we're seeing all over the place right now, right? So for what that's worth, here we are, and we will continue to be here, right? They can try to get rid of us. Good luck with that. I want to ask another question related to that. Although both issues in volume 23 are, as always, timely responses to global current events, the nature of journal publishing means that months, sometimes even years, as many of you know, can pass from the point of submission and acceptance to the point of publication. Could a few of you say a bit about the context in which you wrote, submitted, revised, and saw your piece published, and like what changed, right, from the moment where you were creating this thing, conceptualizing this thing, you know, not to use maternal metaphors, but giving birth to this thing, and then seeing it, you know, appear in the world, and just, you know, what that was like, and how the movement of time has affected your own thinking about what you have created.
I can start off. So for my piece, I was very much interested in the relationship between enforced and voluntary silences. And I think it's especially relevant now with these interventions that we're seeing with censorship. And my piece had a kind of a long process in coming to light, but it came at just the right time. And I think I've always been infatuated with Duke University Press because of its boldness and its kind of reckless truth sharing. And so I had published before with American literature, so I felt like this was the perfect corollary for critical feminist studies. And as I was hearing everybody else speaking, I was thinking about how, as women of color scholars, much of our work is subject to epistemological erasure, but more than that, it's an assault on our ontologies. There's just been this violent messaging about how we don't belong. And I'm grateful that this is now a preserved space, and especially with this endowment, that there is that prioritization of freedom of speech, and we're going to need that ever more as we continue. And then just one last point that I'll say is, as I've been thinking a lot about what it means to be the human, what it means to be the citizen, there's been a recent turn in new citizenship studies where it's not so much about prioritizing or recentering the state and how the state recognizes people, but thinking about citizenship from the eye of the artist, thinking about citizenship as a form of political membership. What we're doing right here, it could be a form of citizenship. It's a form of access, belonging, resource sharing. And so just this current moment, as dark as it is, it's also expanding other ways of agency and connection, despite this mass disenfranchisement that we're going through.
I really appreciate that. Again, all of you are just, you know, I hoped when I first started this, and every year that I do it, I think this is what this is for, right? Is to remind us that we're not alone, right? That we in fact belong to a really big global country, right? Which is, you know, the Meridians world, right? This world where we see each other, we hear each other, we value each other, we support each other, right? Even across, you know, real differences that we have, but that's the nature of love, right? Is accepting our differences and our flaws, but also knowing that there's genuine commitment to our well-being, right? Would somebody else like to jump in on that question about kind of time and process from moment of creation to publication, and how that affects what you think about your piece? Maybe Priti, I don't know. Oh yes, Aisha, go ahead. Yeah.
So I initially started writing this piece, so long ago, like 2014, a long time ago, at the beginning of my time in graduate school. And so it was when I first started being interested in studying Black sororities. And one of the things that had come up was, these conversations about, police brutality, right? And the situation under which Alpha Kappa Alpha and Delta Sigma Theta told their members to not wear paraphernalia at protests, right? And so that launched like a whole thought for me about, critically thinking about these organizations and the work that they do, right? And so, when I first wrote it, I was thinking the same thing, right? Because people are asking questions like the BYP 100, right? Was asking like, how relevant are you? Like, if you're not like doing this work, right? And so I think that, as time has progressed, I think it becomes even more important for us to ask questions about how it is that these organizations have made themselves staples in the Black community, and that, who claim to be doing so much work in the Black community, for us to be critical about the ways in which they're engaging with the Black community, if they're like reproducing like elitism, or, as E. Franklin Frazier talks about, this like window dressing to, their service work that they say that they're doing. And so I became really interested in that, and then looking at it from the international perspective and thinking about like, what does their work even do on the international scale, right? Like, is it enough to like say like, oh, we're going to build a friendship tree, right? Like, who is that helping, right? And so, I really want to think critically about these organizations, although I do want to be clear, I do think that they're very important organizations, have a mass amount of political power, which we've seen recently. But, it caused me to ask a lot of questions, and I continue to have a lot of questions today.
Thank you. One more person on that question, maybe, or?
Sure, I can. I mean, as a poet, there's a way that it's like, I don't know, some poems take a long time and sometimes they're quick. But I do feel like there's also this way that when you're waiting for the publication process, that things it allows for some kind of magic to happen around it, of like, the two poems that are in here, one of them is in my book that's coming out in April. And, thinking about like this was the first book where I really had to do historical research for my poetry. And so then also thinking about, well, why is that a fit for Meridians? And, you send your poems out to a bunch of places, and then that Meridians was like, yeah, this is a fit for us. And we want to do this sort of weird poem that doesn't actually have any words in it, that is about the erasure of the historical record. Like, of course, that makes sense that would end up in Meridians. And then also, it's so exciting to see it come out. And, sometimes my poems come out in journals that are all poetry or all creative writing, which is also really nice. And I like reading those. But then to be able to read this in conversation with all of these other scholars and thinkers' works that are, Lisa, as you said, like personal and political in their stakes, and thinking about like your piece, Lisa, really, I have a lot of friends who are becoming birthing parents right now. That's like so like as I'm reading this really interesting historical essay, right, where a person is also the author's also delving into her own family history, which I was doing in my poems, like getting to be in those kinds of conversations is really interesting. And then also, Umaya, your piece, as I went through and saw one of the photos you used from a Dyke March in San Francisco, that photo was taken by a photographer who is the aunt of one of my best friends who I went to Smith with. So it just felt like, it's like that's sort of the magic of like you send your work out and you wait and you see where it lands. And then sometimes it magically brings all of these things together that are not connections I could have foreseen for my work to be in conversation with. And yet somehow it is.
Thank you, Caroline. So I just have to say that, you know, I really, again, I love everything I publish. You probably all have gathered that, but your poem, because of what it does on the page in terms of the silences, it so beautifully visually captures what you are trying to convey, that even for someone who's a sociologist, not a literary person, it, you know, it was clear, right? It was very moving in its subtlety as well. Okay, so let's, oh yeah, Umaya, jump in.
Can I just respond real quick? I know I already answered one question, but I just wanted to give, and that's like, so I love this intersection with Caroline. We need to talk after this, but my piece, I originally sent it out to another journal in fall 2020, and it spent 2 years at that journal and was rejected. And so it's been a long time coming. And one thing that I had been really frustrated with was that I really love and respect Jasbir Puar's work, but she's not the only one who writes about homo nationalism and pinkwashing and Orientalism and the relationships with gender and sexuality. And I just felt very strongly that if you're gonna talk about queer Palestinians or queer Palestine solidarity politics, maybe you should also look at the history that came before the work of Jasbir Puar and before 9/11. But I just felt like there was no, like, either the writing was really bad and that's why it was rejected, but I had other pieces that had been languishing in the pipeline. And so it just felt like finally a journal took this work seriously. And one of the major criticisms that came with my work in other reviews was that, oh, you only focus on one person. And it's like, well, I'm calling it radical biography for a reason, because you cannot find a lot of historical narratives of queer Arabs for a variety of reasons. So I don't know, either you take queer Arab American history as it is or you don't. And so it's sort of reassuring to hear Caroline's like connection to like seeing that image and being like, oh my gosh, because then it makes me feel like, oh, that I'm hitting the stride and I found the right place at the right time. And so that's really reassuring to hear. But I just wanted to also just put it out there that it took 4 years for that thing. So
I know, and I just have to say again, you may have all heard this at some point or another from me or from Ali or whoever you may have been communicating with. It is always, unfortunately, a long process just because of the nature of scholarly journals and academic publishing and the review process, which particularly during the pandemic became even more challenging. And honestly, you probably all have felt this yourself. A lot of people were just burned out and we're appropriately learning to say, no, I can't do that, myself included. But what that means then is that in some cases, we've had to ask 10, 15, 20 people to read the pieces because we are very much committed to the double anonymized peer review process, because particularly for our scholars who are in academic institutions in the United States, as often, BIPOC folks, queer folks, transgressive folks who are in some way troubling, right, the received status quo, conventional knowledge. We want it to be clear to tenure and promotion committees, to deans and provosts, and the folks who, pay our salaries and make sure that we get to keep on keeping on, that this is really serious, rigorous work, that it is meeting literally the highest standard, right, of assessment and feedback and review. At the same time, we worry a lot about what peer means. We want to make sure that it's actually a peer reviewer, someone who understands, not a gatekeeper, right? Someone who understands what you are doing, why it matters, how you are doing, what it is contributing, right? So that work of both and, right? Both the gold standard of double anonymized peer review and an actual peer, right? And, trying as much as possible to avoid the reviewer two problem, right? So, and really, just trying to make the process be as generative and productive and helpful to our contributors, whether those are poets or visual artists or photographers, interviews, etc. Before it hits the page. And sometimes even if it goes somewhere else, right? Because I also only have 500 pages and I am really thrilled that I'm getting much more than I can ever publish. And so I'm also trying to see if at some point I can get a third issue, a third issue of Meridians, more people. Priti, what was just being discussed reminded me of your work on Ruby Hembrom about we do actually publish a lot of pieces that are about one person, right? That are this kind of single focus or one family, as in Lisa's case and so forth, because I/Meridian see value in that, right? It's not ever just one person, or our filmmaker from New Zealand. We are never just one person, right? We are multitudes. So Priti and maybe Denise, if you want to talk about that question of what it means to focus on a single person and what they give us access to understanding.
Thank you for that. I mean, there's so many potential responses to many questions, but I was really waiting for a chance to be able to talk about Ruby's work rather than, other things. The opportunity to do this interview of Ruby came from Bushuli, who was one of the co-editors of the issue. And Bushuli and I had spent some time at the Institute for Research on Women at Rutgers, where I was a grad student. And so we knew each other from a time before, a time during which we've had lots of conversations about scholarship on Adivasi women, and the politics of knowledge production were such a huge part of that conversation. And so when Bushuli approached me, it was such a great opportunity to learn about Ruby. And I think the reason why work on people like Ruby are important is because I think sometimes individuals open up doors to entire universes, really. And Ruby's work is one that has been really pioneering in terms of creating a niche in a publishing industry that centers Adivasi or Indian indigenous authors. It's an Adivasi initiative. It's an Adivasi publishing house that tries to center Adivasi voices mostly. And so Ruby's work has been tremendous in kind of carving out this space in a publishing industry that is notorious for being filled with dominant caste voices in India, and the impact of the work is also tremendous, right? And so it helps us see the nature of the publishing industry itself. It opens doors to so many economies that we don't really have a full sense of how they work, really. And so I had a chance to understand, more about the publishing industry, to know about ways in which Adivasi knowledge was being circulated outside of spaces of mainstream publishing. And she tells stories about her father running a newsletter out of their home when they were young, but also about the consistent sort of gatekeeping in the mainstream publishing industry, which necessitated carving out this niche space to center Adivasi voices, intersections into, there's insights about academia and how, indigenous people are largely seen as statistics or data within these spaces, right? And their voices are not heard, or they're spoken for by dominant caste or white folks, right? And so I think a conversation with Ruby sort of opens doors to understand so many economies, so many spaces, and from a perspective that we should be making more room to hear about, really. So and the interview format is so ideal to do something like that. You can go anywhere and everywhere, and it allows us to engage with or encounter the personal as well in interesting ways. To speak to the time question, on the one hand, there's something really timeless about unfortunately, Indigenous dispossession. We've been experiencing that. We've not been experiencing that. We live in structures that have been pushing the dispossession of Indigenous people and lands and knowledges for a long, long time. The gatekeeping of marginalized knowledge production in various spaces is also something that has existed for a long time. But I think interviews and with one person can really kind of give us a sense of the enduring nature of so many of these things, as well as be a way to kind of crack that open, right? And so, yeah.
And to literally allow them to speak for themselves, right? So
absolutely.
Denise, you want to say something about your filmmaker and the work that she did, and the work of telling the story of the work that she did?
Yeah. When there was the call for papers, I read it, and immediately I thought about, okay, that's an issue for Merata Mita. So she's very, very important Indigenous filmmaking, especially in New Zealand and for the Maori. And I was thinking about, okay, yes, of course, providing some context, talking about some other filmmakers and stuff like that, but she should be on focus. So that's really important. And sometimes I was thinking, okay, would that fit? So just one person just to talk about. But then I realized when I started writing and researching that, yes, that's enough because she's representative for lots of others. She started a movement and she's really important in starting to keep things going at that time. Yeah, she played a really significant role, not only her work, but also her activism and her life as being a single mother, and how she engaged with all the different levels in politics and filmmaking and all these things and her experiences. So that's what I really tried to point out, that she's a significant figure in all this process of developing Indigenous film, Indigenous cinema. And so I thought she would be the right person just to talk about in the whole essay.
Thank you. And I should point out that in our On the Line feature, I believe we have a clip perhaps of one of the films as a supplement, a complement to that article and to that issue. So if you folks want to see and learn a little bit more about the filmmaker that Denise wrote about, you can go to the On the Line tab in our website. Yurika, I was thinking about the question of performance, which is what your piece really did such a fantastic, sophisticated job of helping us, again, you're in the Indigenous feminisms across the world issue, but you could just as easily have been in the Counterpoints issue, because you ask us to think differently about some of these terms. And it's actually one of the things I really love about the issue, because your analysis and theorization of what Ainu performers are doing directly contradicts what some other Indigenous activists are doing in terms of how they are using certain language, right? Which is exactly the beauty of it, that there are these multiple strategies of intervention. So could you say a little bit about your piece and the performers and the argument that you're making and how that connects to what we've been talking about so far?
Thank you for asking that. I'm really impressed how you remember all these things. It's really amazing. So like you said, my piece talks about Ainu women performers who actually comes out in their regalia, but they say, we're just humans, so don't see us as Indigenous. And this is their very specific activism, actually. And I'm not saying this should be for all Indigenous people, but in particular in Japan, when they actually say there is no Ainu, and yet, doing this really terrible racist attack on the people who claim they are Ainu. This is one way to really take the weapons and turn it around against the enemy. So it came out, as I argue, that it's a very specific cultural context and historical moment. The Ainu people just got acknowledged. Literally 2019, they have become officially indigenous of Japan, when, you know, indigeneity precedes the nation. So it's really ridiculous, but ridiculous is what we have to deal with. So they actually do some really gimmicky, tricky things. And I thought I would like to find some wisdom in it. The message is all the same about the inclusion, about being or having human dignity, while choosing how to define indigeneity on their own terms. So it was a fun piece to write, and I also really appreciate the Meridians for letting me include about that piece in the discourse of whole transnational indigeneity. Oftentimes I find it really difficult to find a venue to talk about even indigeneity in Asia, or, you know, especially like something really weird like this Asian gimmicky, you know, Ainu indigenous performance. So I really appreciate the creative way that encouraged me to think about this piece. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, so I one of the things I love about being editor is that I learn so much in this role. You know, teaching at a small liberal arts college that is largely undergraduate focused. We do have some graduate programs, and we have a school for social work that has PhD and master's programs, but that really is a separate institution. I don't get to work with graduate students, very rarely. Occasionally I'm asked to be an outside reader for a dissertation or that sort of thing. But being editor and reading hundreds of submissions every year, I have just really gotten the benefit of an incredible additional education beyond my own field of specialization, right? So it is always, it's just wonderful to learn and to from all of you, right, about the worlds that you are helping the rest of our readers also understand. I want to ask one last question and then give you all an opportunity to ask each other a question or follow up on something that's been said. And the question is about our cover art. Just to remind our folks, this is also one of the most fun parts of the work, is picking this beautiful cover art, which Meridians began including art on its covers under the editorship of Miriam Shansi, who was our second editor, I think. And we've never stopped since then. These two issues, the spring one has the work of a Palestinian artist in exile, Dana Barkawi, who was going to try and join us today, but I gather wasn't able to. This piece is called Woman Digging Thorns Out of a Field, and it is about the relationship to land and centers on a poem by Sami al-Qasim, a resistance poet and outspoken opponent of racism and oppression in the Middle East. And its original, actually, which I wish I could have had it done on the cover, actually has gold thread and gold leaf on it. So it's just a very visually engaging piece in addition to its other colorfulness. And then this one by Levon Bell, for those of us who live at the shoreline, which is also inspired by a poem, Audre Lorde's A Litany for Survival. And this work explores the relationship between the body, landscape, history, and memory. And again, as a Caribbean heritage, Dominican heritage Caribbeanist, I really loved this one the minute I saw it. And Levon's work was also referenced in our BIPOC Europe issue. So I was going to ask all of you if you could say a word about your reaction when you saw the cover to the issue that your piece came out in, and whether you had thoughts about it or how it resonates with your work. So yeah, jump in.
I was so excited when I saw the cover. I'm a visual artist myself, and my undergrad degree is in visual arts. So I was really excited to see the nature of the figure. And I was incredibly excited to see that it was a Palestinian artist, because I think in every possible way, we need to support the Palestinian people right now. And when I saw it, I almost had an ekphrastic moment where I'm like, oh, I can write another poem about this, because there were like so many layers, and you can just see a woman's work and the struggle and everything in that piece of art. So I was so pleased, because I'm very, very fussy and I complain endlessly about bad art everywhere. But I was just so honored and pleased to be in that issue with that wonderful piece. And it's beautiful to hear you talk about it, because as you're describing it with the threads and the gold leaf, like I could see it now. It's even coming more to life for me. So I really appreciated that, and I loved it.
And I'll just say, by the way, that I had picked the art a year in advance, more than a year in advance of October 7th and other, more recent happenings. So again, it was in many ways serendipitous, right? As these things often happen. Yeah.
Hey everyone, I just want to say that it's so beautiful and just made me really excited to share my paper with that cover. Say, hey, so my paper is in this, but it also got me thinking about my book project. And this, my paper in the volume 1 is a preface to my book manuscript, which I'm still working on, where I'm actually going to put all the qualitative data and the indigenous best practices from indigenous midwives, and then putting the birthers' perspectives and testimonies in my book. So this is also getting me thinking about what my book cover is going to be, because now I'm like, hey, it matters. It just like, has an appeal when you have such a beautiful cover that just pulls you into like reading what's in it. So I want to say it's beautiful. And I might not get a chance to talk again because I know we're pressed for time. I just want to say how beautiful it is also to have this ceremony that's bringing us all together to hear about all of our works and to see how our work intersects with one another, just like being on the chat box with Lisa, and I'm going to continue to be in touch with her. I know for sure the people that I'm going to be citing in my work, because this is so powerful. So I want to say thank you to Meridian for this space, for the cover, and just pretty much for everything, for giving me the voice and the space to publish my paper. Thank you.
You're reminding me, Esther, to ask all of you, please, to use Meridians in your own scholarship and in your teaching, right? To include it in your syllabi, to cite it in your scholarship, to tell friends and family and colleagues about it, because we do use our website as a way of trying to democratize access also. So if you have folks who are outside the paywall, just email us. We will send things out. I've sent entire collections of Meridians, ship them to whatever institutions, organizations, universities, especially in the global South, because that's the point, right? We want to keep your work alive, and the way it's kept alive is by people reading it, people citing it, people thinking with it and teaching it. It will not just, stay on a shelf somewhere, right? Somebody else want to talk about the art? Yeah, she's yes, please.
Yeah, so I just want to share very briefly that I worked as a associate editor for Inter-Asia Cultural Studies Journal before 2 years ago, and I had a chance to also participate in the process of choosing which artwork to be the cover, and choosing the fonts, the right fonts, the color of the fonts, and all that to match the art, and also to imagine how when readers see this cover, how they would have their initial thought, and then once they read through all the articles, how do they reflect back to this art and have a deeper understanding of it. So I think it's a very refreshing process, as I see the covers of these 2 issues and also read through all the works in there, and I found that journey. So yeah, just want to say thank you for choosing these 2 really beautiful arts.
Thank you. So yes.
I was If I can jump in really briefly, I was very thrilled with the choice of the image for the cover, not just because of the moment that it came in, but I think it was a very apt cover to think about Indigenous resistance and life making and art and knowledge production. Not only at this time, but hopefully that is being something that will always characterize a way of being in the world in the face of large-scale dispossession across so many contexts. And I think it's a great sort of way to think about transnational solidarity in this moment in the world, but also of so many people and so many feminists across so many geographical locations to be featured in a journal with art by a Palestinian artist at this time. Very thrilled. Thank you.
All right, we're just about at time, but I wanted to give you all an opportunity. If you want to have a final word or a question that you want to ask one of your co-panelists or a thought. Anyone? All set?
Honestly, this is not a particular question, but I just wanted to echo Esther's gratitude as well. That like, I don't know about y'all, but like I'm not used to having this kind of communal opportunity to talk about my work. I think that like what's so hard about the profession is how much we kind of write in isolation. And so I just want to note how refreshing this has been to connect with y'all. And I think, you know, just a further reflection of how much Meridians is not just Meridians, but is also like a politic that we associate with it, right? That allows us to connect and prioritizes these connections in this way. So yeah, thank y'all, and I'm grateful to all of y'all.
Thank you, Shamara. So what we'll do is we'll send out an email list so you can all have each other's emails as well, because that really is the point, right? I call it the Meridians Project because I do think about it as just more than just a journal, even though a journal is a big thing and it's an important thing. But it's the community, right? That really is the point, is that we are in community with one another. And just, again, you know, in those moments where you're feeling maybe devastated, depressed, and alone, to remember that you are not, right? That we are not alone. That in fact, there is a broad and rich and powerful community with you and behind you always. And maybe that's a good place to end. So thank you all again for all the work that you do, for contributing your work to Meridians, to believing in us as good shepherds and stewards of your creativity and your contributions to the world, for reading us, for teaching us, and for sharing us. And we hope that you will come and see us at NWSA in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Aurora, we're coming, right? And I think I'm inspired to do a Meridians reception that we'll send you a notice about. So we hope you come so you can actually see each other in 3 dimensions. All right. Thank you all again. Have a lovely, lovely evening.
Before you all leave, could we get everyone smiling so we can take a little picture of the panel? Thank you.
Got us? All right, Renelle. We'll share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Renelle. Thank you, Nada. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Nice to meet everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Likewise.
Bye-bye.